men that she was working for as a domestic. But what ends up happening is the judge, he's sympathetic to Lucy's cause, but as he explains to the city, he said it's not just Lucy who's on trial. Our city is on trial. Because think about what's happened so far. Abraham Lincoln has been elected, and South Carolina has seceded, and now other states are starting to secede from the Union. And he says, are we going to uphold our values? Are we going to throw a bone to the South? Like, what are we going to do here? And her court case is followed very closely by abolitionists of this region. Thousands of people are congregating around the courthouse every day. And you can see the courthouse. It's the left-hand building in this photo. So unfortunately, the judge determines that she be remanded back into slavery, back to her enslaver, Goshorn. And then the abolitionists of these communities start to come up with these tactics that maybe they're going to be able to free Lucy when they're trying to transfer her from the courthouse to the jail, or maybe when they're taking her to the train depot, or maybe in a more rural area of Ohio, they can, surround a depot down there. All of their attempts are thwarted. The rumors are spreading like crazy, so that when they are transporting her back to Virginia, they bypass all of the stops and they take her straight back into Virginia. Sarah Lucy Bagby was the last person tried under the fugitive slave laws of this country. And when she is returned back into Virginia, she is put in jail. She is not sent back to her enslaver. He says just put her in jail. In 1863, the Union forces, 1862, the Union forces go into Virginia, and she is freed, and she comes back to Cleveland. And there's this huge celebration of Jubilee in Cleveland for her. She lives in Pittsburgh for a few years. She gets married. That's when she takes the last name Johnson. And but she comes back to Cleveland, and she is buried there. Like John Malvin, though, her story is forgotten for many years. She isn't given a marker for her gravestone until 2012. And that's her marker, 2010. And that's her marker there. So we won't be at the Woodland Cemetery tonight, just the Erie Street. So there are also a number of USCT who are buried. About 86 men are buried in Woodland Cemetery from the what was called the United States Colored Troops. A lot of men from Oberlin and Cleveland were recruited to serve with the USCT. The USCT wasn't formally recognized until 1863. That's when it's formed, after the enactment of the Emancipation Proclamation. And Ohio, at first, was reluctant to allow for the formation of a USCT. And there were a number of African-American leaders, who you're going to hear more about tomorrow in Oberlin, such as John Mercer Langston, who are petitioning to the governor saying, when you need us, we're here. But in the meantime, they're not just sitting back and waiting for the governor to say, go ahead. They are actively recruiting black soldiers to serve in other states that have militias at this point, such as the 54th and 55th Massachusetts. If you've ever heard of the movie Glory, the movie Glory depicts the actions of the 54th Massachusetts. So there were a number, about 20% of the Massachusetts regiment was from Ohio. So it takes a few months, but finally Governor Todd, he's feeling the pressure federally that he needs to start recruiting more soldiers. That's when he relents and he says, yes, we'll have our own USCT formed here. They formed the 5th USCT out of Ohio, and so a number of these men buried in Cleveland are part of that regiment. And many of those men, even though they're veterans, they don't have markers. So there are some like Charles Good that do, but this marker that I showed before, the VA is very strict about what they will allow for documentation to get a veteran stone re-administered, or so if you see veteran stones in your local cemeteries that need to be fixed up, or they need a stone, you have to provide pretty, good documentation to show that, they are buried there. So that's a barrier, unfortunately. Some places that are vital to the Underground Railroad stories from Northern Ohio. One is the Unionville Tavern. This is a little east of Cleveland. So as I mentioned, Cleveland becomes this capital of the Western Reserve. But to get out here, there's like a huge expanse of nothing between here and Buffalo, basically. So this tavern was put in place for people who were traveling this route between Erie and Buffalo and Cleveland. So the Unionville Tavern, well traversed, it's near the lake. It starts serving as an Underground Railroad station. Then it also is hosting events, and many people are coming to this area, and they're holding conventions there, like abolitionist conventions. Well, there's a couple of men who go to the Unionville Tavern, the Clark brothers, Lewis and Milton Clark. Lewis and Milton Clark had been enslaved. They were separated as children and sold to different families, although they were still kind of in the same family. Half of their family was white. They were the enslavers. So what ended up happening was that both brothers independently sought their freedom, and they were successful in doing so. Milton was first, and then Lewis. Lewis tracked Milton to Oberlin, and then they lived in Cleveland. They were speaking out. They were giving lectures on abolition. They published their own narratives, and they ended up at Unionville Tavern. Well, Milton was actually captured by a mob at the tavern, and they threatened to return him back into slavery. But the town rallied behind him. They were able to help Milton get away from that mob, and then they swore that no bounty hunter, no slave catcher, no enslaver would ever capture a person from their area and return him back into slavery. And they kept that promise. Now, a few years later, somebody travels to the Unionville Tavern. She hears this story. That person's Harry Beecher Stowe, and she hears the story of the Clark brothers. They inspired her character of George Harris in the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. And actually, Lewis Clark is buried in Oberlin, and his marker says as much on it. So the Plymouth Church that you see here is not an Underground Railroad station. It is a highly abolitionist location, however. This church was a split off of what was called the Old Stone Church. The Old Stone Church was run by a minister named Samuel Aiken. Around 1850, with the passing of the Fugitive Slave Law, a congregation member was taken from the church, and a freedom seeker. And the congregation was so upset by this. They said that Aiken wasn't the leader that they needed. I mean, Aiken was an abolitionist. He started an anti-slavery society, but the fact that under his watch, this freedom seeker was taken, his congregation split. And so they formed their own church. They named it the Plymouth Church after, what was his name? Henry Beecher, after his church in New York City. And what ends up happening is they build that church after a couple years, that physical church. In the cornerstone of that church, they put a copy of the Bible and a copy of the newly published Uncle Tom's Cabin. And then the final location that we have a remnant of today is Cozad Bates House. Again, its connections to the Underground Railroad are a little nebulous, but we do know that the the family that lived here and built this house, they were abolitionists. They were funding causes of abolition and quite possibly Underground Railroad activity too. The house, though, even though it doesn't have this strong connection to the Underground Railroad, it has been rehabbed by an organization in the community and is being used as an interpretive center for the Underground Railroad. So following this early leadership of Cleveland, following the Civil War with the achievement of abolition, that I guess, people striving for more equality, for more progress continues in Cleveland. Cleveland remains an area of early African American leadership and change. And one such person is John Patterson Green. John Patterson Green's family came up from North Carolina. They're part of this mass migration from North Carolina up to northern Ohio. They're looking for opportunities, but by the time that they get up here to Ohio, they don't have any money. They have very little prospects here. They're really struggling when they get up to Cleveland. So much so that John, as a teenager really, he has to drop out of school to be able to take a job and help his family just to get by. But he's able then to go back to school. He studies independently, gets high school diploma. He goes to various universities, goes through law school. He gets he passes the bar exam. He becomes a lawyer. He becomes an elected official for Cleveland. He serves in the state Congress, at the state level as a representative. When he's at Ohio as a representative here in Columbus, he proposes a new holiday called Labor Day, and it gets adopted as a state holiday, and then 4 years later in the 1890s it is adopted federally as a new holiday. So he is the father of Labor Day. Eliza Bryant was also from North Carolina. Her mother had been enslaved, but after the 13th Amendment was passed, Polly, who was her mother, and Eliza, they move up from North Carolina to Cleveland. Like the Greens, they had no money. They had very little in their name. They're struggling just to get by, but even though they are struggling, they also know that other people are struggling too. So what little they have, if they can provide a bed, a place to stay, a meal, maybe a little bit of money to help somebody get on their feet, they do that. And so Eliza has this role model in her mother, who is helping out people, literally giving like the clothing off of her back to them. So Eliza grows up with these values. When she becomes an adult, she and her congregation in the 1880s, 1890s, they see a problem that's growing. That there are aging African Americans who don't have family members to take care of them, and they can't just go to any rest home because of segregation. So where do they go? Who takes care of them? And so she and her some of the female members of her congregation, they start a rest home in Cleveland, and they start taking care of those aging individuals. That rest home is still active today, and it was renamed in the 1960s after the Eliza Bryant. This is part of the Ohio State University here, yeah. And stadium coming up. Thank you.
OH?